Alright guys, so today we are doing lesson 5. I can use tape diagrams to find an equivalent ratio when given the part-to-part ratio and the total of those two quantities, or when given the part-to-part ratio and the difference between those two quantities. So we're going to be working with tape diagrams, finding equivalent ratios as we have in the past couple of lessons, but the difference here is instead of knowing the value of each box that goes into the tape diagram, we're going to be figuring that out by, they'll either tell us the difference or they'll tell us the total of the two together, and then that will allow us to use some division and figure out what the value of each box would be. So that'll make a little more sense as we look at a couple of examples here. Let's get started. Okay, so I am taking a look at example 1. This example is broken up in a couple of different steps for us, so we're really going to make sense of this together. But example 1 says a county superintendent of highways is interested in the number of types of vehicles that regularly travel within his county. In the month of August, a total of 192 registrations were purchased for passenger cars and pickup trucks at the local Department of Motor Vehicles, aka DMV. The DMV reported that in the month of August, for every 5 passenger cars registered, there were 7 pickup trucks registered. How many of each type of vehicle were registered in the county in the month of August? So the first step in being successful when you're looking at a word problem like this, there are a lot of words on this page. It can be easy to not know what to look at if you just keep it all blank. Something that makes you a really strong mathematician is by boxing in and circling some key information so that you can kind of note it when you look at this problem, you know what to look at. Okay, so I'm also a big fan of using color coding sometimes, or just boxing, just to make sure when I look back at this problem, the information that stands out to me is what will help me model the problem. So when I saw the word total, I boxed that in with 192 to remind me that is the total, okay, because I'm going to need to look back to find that. When I heard this ratio language, the words for every, I know that's a ratio. So I circle the numbers in the ratio and I circle the labels because it's talking about passenger cars to passenger trucks. And that ratio is 5 to 7. So it might be helpful also even to kind of write on the side of the problems, 5 to 7 for cars to trucks. Okay, just something like that to remind you of the ratio in the problem so you don't get those mixed up. All right, let's take a look at some of the breakdown steps for solving this problem. All right, so letter A, let me try to get as close to that as possible for you. Using the information in the problem, write 4 different ratios and describe the meaning of each. So some ratios that we had in this problem, for example, was the one that I wrote that most, that comes just straight out of the problem. So I know 5 to 7, I didn't start that correctly. The ratio of cars to trucks is 5 to 7. Okay, I described what the ratio relationship is, and one thing I want you to note is that is a part-to-part ratio. Okay, because we're going to keep using that language and talking about those are each part, and then part to whole would be including the part to whole would be including the total. So we're going to kind of ignore this total for a second and just think about these two added together would be 12. So the ratio of cars to total vehicles is 5 to 12. Okay, and that is a part to whole ratio. Okay, And the way we find the whole is just by adding up the two parts. Now, the other examples that you could do is saying the ratio of trucks to cars is 7 to 5. The ratio of trucks to total vehicles is 7 to 12. Okay, so just so you know the other possibilities, because it does say use 4 different ratios, but I want to write large enough so you can see it, so I don't have room on my example to write those. Letter B says make a tape diagram. So I'm going to fold this over now so I could still see that information. Make a tape diagram that represents the quantities in the part-to-part ratios that you wrote. Okay, so the part-to-part ratios, we've got a 5 to 7 in this problem. So we're going to make a tape diagram of cars had 5 parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. We need one more box. There we go. To trucks had 7. So I want this one to be bigger. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Letter C says how many equal sized parts. So how many parts do we have here? We found that in the total, 5 and 7 makes 12 equal sized parts. And then letter D says, what total quantity does the tape diagram represent? So now they want to know the actual number of the total, which we boxed in our problem, 192. 192 is the total quantity, 192 vehicles. Now for E, it says, what value does each individual part of the tape diagram represent? So they want the value of each part. That means if we know together there's 192 vehicles, and we know that we have 12 parts, we're going to take 192 and we're going to divide it up equally amongst those 12 parts to find the value of each part. Okay, so 12 goes into 19 one time. Okay, 12 goes into 72. Well, I know that 12 times 5 is 60, so 12 times 6 is 72. So I would label that 16 is the value of each part. So ideally we would write 16 in each one of those just to remind us where that goes. Okay, and then F says how many of each type of vehicle. So now that we have the information represented in our tape diagram, now we can go ahead and solve that. So this top part here, we have 16 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for this bottom part here, we have 16 times 7. Okay, so go ahead and solve those two. Press pause while you solve those multiplication problems, and then press play when you're ready to check your answers. All right, so hopefully when you did 16 times 5, you got 80. 16 times 7, 112. So we just add those into our final answer. 80 cars were registered and 112 trucks were registered. You could put those together in one sentence and say 80 cars and 112 trucks were registered in August.